In the frozen mountains of Afghanistan, death came calling for Commander Marcus Chen at exactly the 0347 hours. What should have been a routine extraction mission turned into a nightmare when enemy forces surrounded his position. With nowhere to run and ammunition running low, Chen found himself staring down the barrels of dozens of weapons. The Taliban fighters had him cornered in a rocky outcrop, and their leader was already celebrating what seemed like certain victory. But Chen didn't know that 800 meters away, hidden in the shadows of an ancient cave, Marine Scout sniper Elena Rodriguez was watching through her scope. Rodriguez had been tracking the same terrorist cell for 3 weeks, and she had never missed a shot in her 7-year career. What happened next would become the stuff of military legend, a rescue so impossible that it defied every rule of engagement and physics itself. This is the true story of how one commander's darkest hour became testimony to the incredible bond between soldiers and how a single bullet fired from nearly half a mile away changed the course of an entire war. What you're about to read will challenge everything you think you know about courage, precision, and the thin line between life and death in combat. Commander Marcus Chen had been in Afghanistan for 18 months, but nothing had prepared him for the silence that fell over the Kunar Province mountains that October morning. The 32-year-old Army Ranger had led countless missions through these treacherous peaks, but something felt different about this one. His team of 8 soldiers was tasked with extracting a high-value intelligence asset from a remote village near the Pakistani border. The mission briefing had seemed straightforward. Get in, grab the informant, and get out before sunrise. Chen's team moved like ghosts through the rocky terrain. Sergeant Mike Torres covered the rear, while Corporal James Wilson handled communications. The rest of the squad spread out in a diamond formation, each man knowing his role without needing orders. They had worked together for over a year, and their coordination was flawless. The informant, a local farmer named Ahmad, who had been feeding information about Taliban movements to U.S. forces, was supposed to meet them at a predetermined location marked only by an old Soviet tank destroyed decades earlier. The first sign of trouble came when Wilson's radio crackled with static. Intelligence reports had indicated the area was clear, but Chen's instincts told him otherwise. The complete absence of animal sounds in the pre-dawn darkness set his nerves on edge. Even the usual chorus of insects had fallen silent. Chen raised his fist, signaling his team to halt. Through his night vision goggles, he scanned the surrounding ridgelines for any sign of movement. Ahmad appeared exactly on schedule, emerging from behind the rusted tank wreckage with his hands visible as instructed. The farmer's face showed the strain of months of double agent work. Dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights, and his nervous glances toward the mountains revealed his fear. Ahmad carried a backpack containing what intelligence officers had described as game-changing information about a planned terrorist attack on American soil. Chen approached the informant while his team maintained overwatch positions. The exchange was supposed to take 30 seconds, grab the intel package, and move to the extraction point where helicopters would pick them up. But as Ahmad handed over the backpack, the farmer's expression changed from relief to terror. His eyes widened as he looked past Chen toward the eastern ridge. The Taliban had been waiting all along. Ahmed had been compromised weeks earlier, but rather than eliminate him immediately, the terrorist leaders had chosen to use him as bait. They knew American forces would come for intelligence this valuable, and they had prepared the perfect trap. Over 40 fighters had positioned themselves in the rocky outcroppings that surrounded the valley floor. They had night vision equipment of their own, supplied by foreign agents who wanted American blood on their hands. The first shots came from 3 directions simultaneously. Muzzle flashes lit up the mountainside like deadly fireworks as automatic weapons opened fire on Chen's position. The sound of bullets striking stone sent sparks flying through the darkness. Ahmed dropped to his knees and covered his head, while Chen immediately began shouting orders to his team. Taurus returned fire from a position behind a large boulder, his M4 carbine barking in controlled bursts. Wilson was already on the radio calling for immediate extraction and close air support, but the nearest helicopters were 25 minutes away. Chen realized with growing dread that they might not have 25 seconds, let alone minutes. The Taliban fighters had chosen their positions expertly. They controlled the high ground on all sides, turning the valley floor into a killing zone. Every route of escape was covered by overlapping fields of fire. Chen's team found what cover they could among the scattered rocks and debris. But the incoming fire was so intense that raising their heads to return shots became nearly impossible. Corporal Wilson managed to get a message through to base camp before a sniper's bullet shattered his radio. The enemy had marksmen of their own positioned in the rocks above, and they were systematically targeting anyone who moved. Chen watched helplessly as one of his youngest soldiers, Private Danny Rodriguez, took a bullet through the shoulder while trying to reach a better position. The Taliban commander, a veteran fighter named Hassan al-Masri, had studied American military tactics for years. He knew that U.S. forces relied heavily on air support and superior firepower to overcome numerical disadvantages. By choosing a location where helicopters couldn't easily operate and positioning his fighters in concealed positions, al-Masri had neutralized many of the advantages Chen's team normally enjoyed. As dawn approached, Chen realized their situation was becoming desperate. Ammunition was running low and the enemy showed no signs of letting up their assault. The Taliban fighters took turns maintaining fire, while others repositioned to tighten the noose around the trapped Americans. Chen could hear al-Masri shouting orders in Pashto, coordinating his fighters with the skill of an experienced military commander. The informant Ahmad had been killed in the initial exchange of gunfire, and the intelligence package lay scattered across the rocky ground. Chen managed to gather most of the documents during a brief lull in the shooting, stuffing them inside his tactical vest. Whatever information Ahmad had died protecting might prove crucial to preventing terrorist attacks back home. Torres called out that he was down to his last 2 magazines. Chen did a quick count of his own ammunition and felt his stomach sink. They had maybe 10 minutes of sustained firefight left before they would be forced to fight with bayonets and bare hands. The Taliban fighters seemed to have unlimited ammunition, and their discipline under fire impressed Chen, despite the circumstances. Chen tried his backup radio, hoping to reach any American forces in the area. The mountains interfered with most communications, but sometimes atmospheric conditions allowed signals to bounce over the peaks. He broadcast on emergency frequencies, giving their coordinates and requesting immediate assistance. The only response was static, broken occasionally by what might have been voices speaking Arabic. The enemy fire intensified as more fighters joined the battle. Chen counted muzzle flashes from at least 15 different positions, and he suspected more Taliban forces were moving into the area. Al-Masri had probably called for reinforcements the moment the trap was sprung. This wasn't just an ambush. It was a carefully planned operation designed to capture or kill a high-value American target. Chen looked at his watch and calculated how long they had been pinned down. 47 minutes had passed since the first shots were fired. His men were exhausted, wounded, and running out of options. The young commander had to make a decision that would determine whether his entire team lived or died in these remote mountains thousands of miles from home. Private Rodriguez was losing blood from his shoulder wound, and Chen could see that the kid was starting to go into shock. Sergeant Torres had taken shrapnel from a grenade explosion and was fighting with his left arm hanging useless at his side. The remaining 6 members of Chen's team were in various states of exhaustion and injury, but they continued to fight with the determination that had made them Rangers. The Taliban commander al-Masri appeared on a ridge about 200 meters away, confident enough in his tactical advantage to show himself. Through his rifle scope, Chen could see the man's face clearly. Al-Masri was younger than expected, maybe 35, with intelligent eyes and the bearing of a professional soldier. He raised a megaphone and called out in accented English, "American commander, you are surrounded. Surrender now and your men will be treated according to Islamic law. Continue fighting and you will all die in these mountains. Your helicopters cannot reach you in time, and more of my fighters are coming. Choose wisely." Chen knew what Islamic law meant for captured American soldiers. Videos of beheadings and torture had made their way to intelligence briefings. Surrender wasn't an option, but continuing to fight seemed like suicide. The Taliban fighters had them completely outgunned and outnumbered in a position where American technological advantages meant nothing. The mountains stretched endlessly in all directions, their peaks disappearing into morning clouds. Chen had never felt so isolated or so responsible for the lives of his men. Every decision he made in the next few minutes would echo through the lives of 8 families back home. Wives would become widows, children would lose fathers, and parents would bury sons because of choices he made on this rocky hillside. Chen checked his weapon and counted his remaining ammunition. One more time. 18 rounds left in his current magazine, plus 2 full magazines in his gear. Maybe 90 rounds total if he was conservative with his shots. Against 40 or more enemy fighters in superior positions, those bullets wouldn't last long enough to make a difference. The sound of helicopters had been noticeably absent from the morning air. Chen knew that meant either the aircraft couldn't navigate the mountains in current weather conditions, or they had been shot down trying to reach his position. Either possibility meant his team was completely on their own until they could fight their way to a more accessible location. Al-Masri's fighters began their final assault just as the sun crested the eastern peaks. Chen could see at least 20 men moving down the mountainside toward their position, using covering fire and tactical movement that would have impressed instructors at Fort Benning. These weren't undisciplined terrorists. They were experienced fighters who knew how to wage war in these mountains. Chen made his choice. Rather than wait for the enemy to overrun their position, he decided to attempt a breakout toward the north where the terrain offered slightly better cover. It was a desperate plan with little chance of success, but it was better than dying trapped in a hole waiting for the inevitable. He gathered his remaining men and explained the plan in quick, urgent whispers. They would move in pairs, using covering fire to bound forward from one position to the next. The wounded would go first, supported by the strongest fighters. Chen would bring up the rear, making sure no one was left behind. It was a textbook maneuver that required precise timing and more than a little luck. Torres questioned whether Rodriguez could make the movement with his wounded shoulder, but the young private insisted he could keep up. Chen looked into the kid's eyes and saw the same determination that had gotten him through ranger training. These men wouldn't quit fighting until they drew their last breath. The breakout began with Chen laying down suppressing fire, while Torres and Wilson moved to the first waypoint about 50 meters ahead. The Taliban fighters immediately shifted their fire to track the movement, giving Chen's position a temporary reprieve. He used the opportunity to relocate and prepare for the next bound. Rodriguez moved with Wilson, his good arm supporting his rifle, while his wounded shoulder sent streams of blood down his tactical vest. The private made it to cover just as enemy bullets chewed up the ground where he had been running. Chen felt a moment of pride, watching his youngest soldier perform under impossible circumstances. The plan worked for exactly 3 bounds before the Taliban fighters adjusted their tactics. Al-Masri had positioned blocking forces along the likely escape routes, and Chen's team ran directly into a secondary ambush. Machine gun fire from a hidden position cut off their advance and forced them back toward their original defensive position. Chen realized they were trapped in what military tacticians call a kill box, an area where the enemy controlled all movement and could destroy any target at will. His team had perhaps 10 minutes before the Taliban fighters closed the distance enough to use grenades and assault weapons at point-blank range. After that, training and courage wouldn't matter anymore. The commander made one last radio call on his emergency frequency, broadcasting their exact coordinates and tactical situation to anyone who might be listening. He didn't expect a response, but military protocol demanded that someone know what had happened to his team. Somewhere in the chain of command, officers would need to explain to families why their loved ones hadn't come home. And Chen looked at his men taking cover among the rocks and felt a mixture of pride and crushing responsibility. These soldiers had followed him into hell because they trusted his leadership and believed in their mission. Now they were going to die because he had led them into a trap that should have been obvious to any competent officer. The Taliban fighters were close enough now that Chen could hear their voices calling to each other as they coordinated their final assault. Al-Masri appeared again on the ridge, this time carrying an assault rifle instead of a megaphone. The time for surrender offers had passed. What came next would be brutal and quick. Chen chambered around and prepared to make their last stand as expensive as possible for the enemy. If these were to be his final minutes alive, he intended to honor the Ranger creed that had guided his entire military career. He would never leave a fallen comrade, never accept defeat, and never quit fighting until the mission was complete. The sound of approaching footsteps on loose stone told Chen that the final assault was beginning. Taliban fighters were moving up the slope toward their position, using fire and movement tactics to advance under covering fire from the ridgelines. Chen estimated they had maybe 2 minutes before the enemy would be close enough to use grenades and overwhelming firepower to finish the job. He looked up at the morning sky one last time, thinking about his wife Sarah and their 2 young children back in Georgia. Chen had promised them he would come home safe, but promises made in peaceful moments sometimes couldn't be kept in places like this. The mountains of Afghanistan had claimed too many good soldiers already, and it looked like his name would be added to that list. Chen raised his rifle and prepared to sell his life as dearly as possible. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would determine whether he died as a soldier or as a victim. The choice was still his to make, even in these final moments when hope seemed as distant as the snow-covered peaks surrounding their position. Marine Scout sniper Elena Rodriguez had been lying motionless in the same position for 14 hours, her body pressed against the cold stone floor of an ancient cave that overlooked the Kunar province valley. The 28-year-old sniper had tracked the Taliban cell led by Hassan al-Masri for 3 weeks, moving through these mountains like a predatory animal hunting its prey. Her mission was simple in concept, but incredibly difficult in execution. Eliminate al-Masri and disrupt the terrorist network that had been responsible for dozens of attacks on coalition forces. Rodriguez came from a family of soldiers. Her father had served in Vietnam, her grandfather in World War II, and her 2 brothers were currently deployed in Iraq. When she enlisted in the Marines at 18, nobody questioned her decision. What surprised everyone was her natural talent with a rifle. During basic training, instructors quickly realized they were dealing with someone special. Rodriguez could consistently hit targets at distances that challenged even experienced marksmen. After completing Scout Sniper School at the top of her class, Rodriguez had been deployed to Afghanistan for what would become her second tour of duty. Her first deployment had been relatively quiet, but this assignment promised to be different. Intelligence reports indicated that al-Masri was planning something significant, possibly an attack on American soil. The terrorist leader had proven exceptionally difficult to locate, moving constantly through the mountain regions where satellite surveillance was often ineffective. Rodriguez's spotter, Sergeant Kevin Park, lay beside her with high-powered binoculars and a range-finding device. The 2 Marines had worked together for 18 months and had developed the kind of wordless communication that made sniper teams effective. Park could read wind conditions, calculate range adjustments, and spot targets almost as well as Rodriguez could shoot them. Their combined skills had made them one of the most successful sniper teams in the theater. The cave they occupied had been carefully selected after days of reconnaissance. It provided an elevated position with clear lines of sight across the valley floor while remaining completely concealed from observers below. Rodriguez had prepared multiple firing positions within the cave, each offering different angles and ranges. Her primary weapon was a Barrett M80 2.50 caliber rifle, capable of accurate shots beyond 1,500 meters. Intelligence had suggested that al-Masri would be in this area around dawn, possibly meeting with other cell leaders or coordinating attacks. Rodriguez and Park had been in position since sunset the previous evening, taking turns sleeping in 2-hour shifts while maintaining constant observation of the valley below. The waiting was the hardest part of their job hours, of motionless silence broken by moments of explosive action. Through her rifle scope, Rodriguez had watched the American patrol approach the valley floor just after 0300 hours. She immediately recognized the movement patterns and equipment as belonging to Army Rangers. The patrol moved with the kind of disciplined precision that marked them as elite soldiers, but Rodriguez could see they were walking into what looked like a carefully prepared ambush. Park confirmed her suspicions through his binoculars. Taliban fighters were positioned throughout the rocky outcroppings that surrounded the valley floor. The enemy had night vision equipment and appeared to be well armed with automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. Rodriguez counted at least 40 fighters in concealed positions, all waiting for the American patrol to reach a predetermined kill zone. The Marine sniper faced an immediate dilemma. Her mission was to eliminate al-Masri, not to provide support for other American forces. Revealing her position by engaging the Taliban fighters would almost certainly compromise her primary objective. Al-Masri would disappear back into the mountains, and weeks of careful preparation would be wasted. But watching fellow American soldiers walk into a massacre wasn't something Rodriguez could accept. She keyed her radio and attempted to contact a ranger patrol on emergency frequencies. The mountains interfered with most communications, but sometimes atmospheric conditions allowed signals to penetrate the interference. Rodriguez broadcast warnings about the impending ambush, but she received no response. The Rangers continued their approach toward what Rodriguez could see would become their tomb. Park pointed through his binoculars toward a ridge about 400 meters to the east. Hassan al-Masri had appeared, directing his fighters through hand signals and radio communications. The terrorist leader was exactly where intelligence reports had predicted he would be. Rodriguez had a clear shot, and eliminating al-Masri would disrupt the ambush and save the American patrol below. But the moment Rodriguez fired, every Taliban fighter in the valley would know her location. Return fire would force her to abandon her position and retreat through mountain terrain, where al-Masri's fighters had every advantage. The terrorist leader might escape, and Rodriguez would have blown months of intelligence work for the sake of one patrol that had wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. The first shots erupted across the valley floor at exactly 0347 hours. Muzzle flashes lit up the mountainside as dozens of automatic weapons opened fire simultaneously. Rodriguez watched through her scope as the American patrol dove for cover among the scattered rocks and debris. The Rangers were completely outnumbered and outgunned, trapped in a kill zone with no hope of escape. Rodriguez made her decision in that instant. Mission parameters and strategic objectives meant nothing compared to the lives of American soldiers under fire. She adjusted her scope for wind and range, then settled into her shooting position with the kind of calm focus that had made her one of the most effective snipers in the Marine Corps. Her first shot took out a Taliban machine gunner who was pouring fire onto the trapped Rangers from a position about 600 meters away. The .50 caliber bullet struck the fighter's center mass, removing him from the battle instantly. Rodriguez immediately shifted targets, looking for the most dangerous threats to the Americans below. Park called out range and wind corrections while tracking movement through his binoculars. The two Marines worked with the efficiency of a machine, identifying targets and eliminating them in rapid succession. Rodriguez's second shot destroyed a rocket-propelled grenade launcher before the operator could fire at the American position. Her third shot eliminated a sniper who had been targeting the wounded American soldiers. The Taliban fighters immediately began searching for the source of the long-range fire that was systematically destroying their tactical advantage. Al-Masri shouted orders through his radio, directing fighters to scan the surrounding mountains for the hidden sniper. Rodriguez knew she had perhaps 2 or 3 minutes before return fire would force her to relocate. She continued engaging targets with methodical precision, each shot carefully aimed to maximize the tactical advantage for the trapped Rangers below. Rodriguez eliminated fighters who controlled key positions, destroyed crew-served weapons, and created gaps in the Taliban lines that might allow the Americans to escape. Her shooting was so accurate that Taliban fighters began abandoning their positions rather than risk exposure. Park spotted al-Masri attempting to coordinate a flanking maneuver that would cut off any possible escape route for the American patrol. The terrorist leader was moving between positions, using a radio to direct his fighters, while staying low enough to avoid sniper fire. Rodriguez tracked his movement through her scope, waiting for a clear shot that would end the threat permanently. The opportunity came when al-Masri raised himself above a rock outcropping to get a better view of the battle. Rodriguez had less than 2 seconds before he would disappear back into cover. The range was 847 meters, complicated by crosswinds and the fact that her target was moving. It was the kind of shot that separated exceptional snipers from merely good ones. Rodriguez controlled her breathing and squeezed the trigger with the same smooth motion she had practiced thousands of times on training ranges. The bullet traveled for almost 2 full seconds before striking al-Masri in the upper chest, spinning him around and dropping him behind the rocks. Through her scope, Rodriguez could see that the terrorist leader was either dead or mortally wounded. The effect on Taliban morale was immediate and dramatic. Without al-Masri's leadership, the disciplined assault began to fall apart. Fighters abandoned their positions and retreated toward predetermined escape routes in the higher mountains. The coordinated attack deteriorated into sporadic gunfire as individual Taliban fighters looked for opportunities to disengage from the battle. Rodriguez and Park used the confusion to relocate to a secondary position deeper in the cave system. Return fire from Taliban fighters was already impacting the rocks near their original shooting position, and Rodriguez knew they would face concentrated attacks once the enemy determined her location. The cave system offered multiple routes of escape, but Rodriguez wasn't ready to leave yet. From her new position, Rodriguez continued to provide overwatch for the American patrol as they attempted to break out of the kill zone. She could see that the Rangers were wounded and low on ammunition, but they were fighting with the kind of determination that had made them legends. Rodriguez eliminated Taliban fighters who tried to pursue the Americans, clearing a corridor that allowed the patrol to reach better defensive positions. Park received a radio message indicating that American helicopters were en route to extract the trapped patrol, but weather conditions in the mountains were making navigation difficult. The aircraft were at least 15 minutes away, and the Rangers would need to survive that long in their exposed position. Rodriguez decided to maintain her overwatch until the helicopters arrived, regardless of the personal risk. Taliban reinforcements were already moving into the area, attempting to surround the American position before extraction could be completed. Rodriguez could see at least 30 fresh fighters approaching from the north, armed with heavy weapons and moving with tactical discipline. If these reinforcements reached the battle area before the helicopters arrived, the Rangers would be overwhelmed. Rodriguez began engaging the reinforcement column at maximum range, using her .50 caliber rifle to disrupt their advance. The heavy bullets could penetrate most cover at these distances, forcing the Taliban fighters to seek better protection rather than continue their rapid movement toward the main battle. Each shot bought precious time for the Americans fighting in the valley below. Park spotted another group of Taliban fighters attempting to establish a blocking position along the likely helicopter approach route. These fighters carried surface-to-air missiles that could destroy the extraction aircraft before they reached the landing zone. Rodriguez shifted her fire to this new threat, eliminating the missile operators before they could target the incoming helicopters. The sound of rotors echoed across the mountains as two Black Hawk helicopters appeared over the eastern ridge, flying low and fast through the valleys to avoid detection. Rodriguez provided covering fire as the aircraft maneuvered into position, keeping Taliban fighters pinned down while the Rangers prepared for extraction. Door gunners on the helicopters added their firepower to Rodriguez's efforts, creating a protective corridor around the landing zone. The extraction proceeded under intense fire, as Taliban fighters made desperate attempts to prevent the American escape. Rodriguez watched through her scope as the wounded Rangers were loaded onto the first helicopter, while their teammates provided covering fire. The discipline and courage displayed by the soldiers impressed even the veteran Marine sniper, who had seen plenty of combat. The second helicopter lifted off just as Taliban reinforcements reached positions where they could bring effective fire to bear on the landing zone. Rodriguez's overwatch had bought exactly the time needed for a successful extraction. All 8 Rangers survived the ambush, though several required immediate medical attention for their wounds. With the Americans safely away, Rodriguez and Park prepared to begin their own escape through the mountain trails they had reconnoitered during their approach. Taliban fighters were already climbing toward their position, guided by the sound of gunfire and the lingering smoke from Rodriguez's rifle. The two Marines had perhaps a 10-minute head start before they would be pursued by fighters who knew these mountains better than any American. Park destroyed sensitive equipment, while Rodriguez gathered her weapon and ammunition. They moved through the cave system using routes they had memorized during their initial reconnaissance, emerging from a concealed exit point about 200 meters from their original position. The Taliban fighters were still searching the main cave complex, giving the Marines additional time to distance themselves from immediate pursuit. Rodriguez carried her rifle and essential gear, while Park handled navigation and communications. They moved through terrain that would challenge mountain climbers, using techniques learned during specialized training to traverse slopes and cross obstacles that most people would consider impassable. The two Marines were in excellent physical condition, but the pace they maintained would test the limits of their endurance. Behind them, Rodriguez could hear the sounds of pursuit as Taliban fighters discovered their escape route and began following their trail. The enemy had numerical advantages and knowledge of local terrain, but Rodriguez and Park had superior equipment and training that might allow them to reach safety. The race through the mountains had begun, and failure would mean capture or death for both Marines. Rodriguez thought about the American soldiers they had just saved during the extraction. 8 Rangers would return home to their families because she had chosen to abandon her primary mission in favor of providing immediate support. Al-Masri was dead, which accomplished the strategic objective, but Rodriguez's actions would certainly result in questions from superior officers who valued mission accomplishment above all other considerations. Park pointed toward a ridgeline about 2 kilometers ahead where they might be able to establish radio contact with friendly forces. If they could reach that position and call for extraction, American helicopters could pick them up before Taliban pursuers closed the distance. But 2 kilometers of mountain terrain might as well be 200 when running from fighters who knew every trail and hiding place in the area. Rodriguez adjusted her pack and checked her weapon one final time. The mission was far from over, and survival would require every skill she had learned during years of military training. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit were getting closer, and ahead lay some of the most dangerous terrain in Afghanistan. But 8 American Rangers were alive because she had been in the right place at the right time, with the skills to make a difference. The mountains stretched endlessly in all directions, their peaks disappearing into morning clouds. Rodriguez had never felt so alive or so aware of the razor-thin margin between success and failure in combat operations. Every step she took through these hostile mountains was a testament to the training and dedication that had made her one of the most effective snipers in the United States military. The chase through the Afghan highlands had begun, and Rodriguez intended to make sure it ended with 2 Marines reaching safety, rather than 2 more names added to the casualty list that were growing longer with each passing month of war. Park fell into step beside her as they began the deadly race against time and terrain that would determine whether their mission ended in success or tragedy among the unforgiving peaks of the Kunar province. The extraction helicopters carrying Commander Chen and his wounded Rangers had barely disappeared over the mountain ridge when Rodriguez and Park found themselves in a desperate race for survival. Taliban fighters were closing in on their position from 3 different directions, and the 2 Marines had to cover nearly impossible terrain to reach their planned extraction point. What neither of them realized was that their actions in saving the Ranger Patrol had been observed by more than just enemy fighters. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, commanding officer of Joint Task Force Mountain Lion, had been monitoring radio traffic from her command post at Forward Operating Base Chapman when reports of the ambush reached her headquarters. The successful extraction of Chen's patrol had been nothing short of miraculous, and initial debriefs from the rescued Rangers painted a picture of precision sniper support that had turned certain death into survival. Mitchell immediately began investigating who had provided the overwatch that saved 8 American lives. Intelligence analysts worked through the night to piece together what had happened in the Kunar Province Valley. Satellite imagery showed the positions of Taliban fighters during the ambush, and ballistics experts analyzed the engagement to determine the range and accuracy of shots fired by the unknown sniper. The mathematical precision required for some of the shots bordered on the impossible, even for the most skilled marksmen in the military. Rodriguez and Park had been moving through mountain terrain for 6 hours when Park's radio finally picked up a weak signal from American forces. The transmission was broken and filled with static, but they managed to relay their approximate position and request immediate extraction. The response was immediate but not encouraging. Weather conditions prevented helicopter operations in their area for at least 12 more hours. The 2 Marines took shelter in a shallow cave while Taliban search parties continued hunting for them throughout the surrounding mountains. Rodriguez could hear voices calling in Pashto as enemy fighters coordinated their search efforts. The Taliban knew that whoever had disrupted their ambush was still in the area, and they were determined to capture or kill the Americans responsible for al-Masri's death. Park monitored radio frequencies while Rodriguez cleaned her rifle and counted their remaining ammunition. They had enough supplies for perhaps 2 days if they were careful. But staying hidden for that long would require luck as well as skill. The Taliban fighters knew these mountains intimately, and they had already demonstrated tactical discipline that surprised even experienced American soldiers. Meanwhile, Colonel Mitchell's intelligence team had identified Rodriguez and Park as the most likely candidates for the sniper team that had saved Chen's patrol. Their mission profile and last known position matched the tactical situation perfectly. Mitchell immediately began planning a rescue operation, but the same weather conditions that prevented routine helicopter flights would make any rescue attempt extremely dangerous. The breakthrough came when analysts discovered long-range communications equipment that al-Masri had been carrying when he was killed. The terrorist leader had been coordinating with other cell leaders across the region, and his death had disrupted plans for coordinated attacks on multiple coalition bases. Rodriguez's decision to eliminate al-Masri rather than maintain her concealed position had prevented what could have been devastating losses for American forces. Rodriguez was checking their escape route when she spotted movement on a ridge about 800 meters away. Through her scope, She could see a Taliban fighter with what appeared to be a radio, probably coordinating search efforts. The fighter was partially concealed behind rocks, but Rodriguez had a clear shot if she chose to take it. However, firing would reveal their position to every enemy fighter in the area. Park urged caution, pointing out that they needed to remain hidden until extraction became possible. But Rodriguez realized that the radio operator was directing search parties that were systematically covering every possible hiding place in their area. If the Taliban continued their methodical search, discovery was inevitable. Sometimes the best defense was a well-timed offensive action. Rodriguez settled into a prone shooting position and began calculating the shot. The range was challenging but manageable, complicated by wind conditions and the fact that her target was partially concealed. She had perhaps 30 seconds before the radio operator would move to a position where a shot would be impossible. The .50 caliber rifle had enough power to penetrate the light cover, but precision would be critical. The shot was perfect, striking the Taliban radio operator center mass and eliminating the coordination of search efforts in their sector. The death of the radio operator caused immediate confusion among the scattered search parties, buying Rodriguez and Park precious time to relocate to a more secure position. But the sound of the gunshot also provided enemy fighters with a general indication of where the Americans were hiding. Colonel Mitchell received updates on the deteriorating weather conditions that continued to prevent helicopter operations in the mountain region where Rodriguez and Park were trapped. Meteorologists predicted that conditions might improve by late afternoon, but that would still leave the two Marines exposed to enemy action for several more hours. Mitchell began exploring alternative rescue options that didn't depend on aircraft. The Taliban fighters regrouped and intensified their search efforts, bringing in additional fighters from other areas to participate in the hunt. Rodriguez could hear the sounds of pursuit getting closer as enemy forces systematically checked every cave, ravine, and hiding place in the mountains. The two Marines moved constantly, never staying in one position for more than an hour at a time. Rodriguez's legendary moment came when she and Park reached an observation point that overlooked a valley where they hoped to signal for extraction. Through her scope, Rodriguez spotted what appeared to be American soldiers moving through the valley floor about 1,200 meters away. But something about their movement patterns seemed wrong, and Rodriguez realized she was looking at Taliban fighters wearing captured American equipment. The enemy fighters were setting up what appeared to be an ambush along a route that American patrols frequently used. Rodriguez counted at least 20 fighters positioning themselves with automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. If an American patrol entered that valley, they would face the same kind of devastating ambush that had nearly destroyed Chen's Rangers. Park attempted to contact American forces on their radio, but atmospheric conditions continued to interfere with most communications. The Taliban fighters below continued their preparations, testing weapons and coordinating fields of fire with the efficiency of experienced soldiers. Rodriguez realized that she might be the only American in position to prevent another massacre. The range to the Taliban position was 1,247 meters, according to Park's laser rangefinder. Crosswinds were gusting unpredictably through the mountain valleys, and the targets were moving between covered positions as they prepared their ambush. Rodriguez had never attempted a shot at this distance under these conditions, but American lives might depend on her ability to disrupt the enemy preparations. Rodriguez selected her first target carefully, a Taliban fighter who appeared to be the leader of the ambush team. The man was directing other fighters through hand signals and radio communications, clearly coordinating the tactical setup. Eliminating him might disrupt the entire operation and buy time for any approaching American patrols to receive warning about the danger. The wind conditions required Rodriguez to compensate for bullet drift over the extreme range of the shot. She estimated wind speed and direction based on observations of dust and debris movement in the valley below. The .50 caliber bullet would take nearly 3 seconds to reach the target, during which time wind conditions could change dramatically. Rodriguez controlled her breathing and settled into the kind of meditative focus that separated exceptional snipers from merely skilled marksmen. Every aspect of the shot had to be perfect: body position, rifle stability, trigger control, and timing. She had one opportunity to make the shot before the enemy position would be alerted to her presence. The bullet struck the Taliban leader exactly where Rodriguez had aimed, dropping him instantly and causing immediate confusion among the other fighters. The remaining Taliban soldiers began searching for the source of the long-range fire, abandoning their ambush preparations in favor of finding and eliminating the sniper who had killed their commander. Rodriguez immediately shifted targets, engaging other key fighters in the Taliban group before they could reorganize their defensive positions. Her shooting was so precise and deadly that several enemy fighters abandoned their weapons and fled toward the mountains rather than face continued sniper fire from an invisible opponent. The disruption of the Taliban ambush had an unexpected consequence. The gunfire alerted an American patrol that had been approaching the valley to the presence of enemy forces in the area. The patrol commander immediately called for air support and began maneuvering to engage the remaining Taliban fighters from a different direction. Fighter aircraft arrived within minutes, guided by coordinates that Rodriguez transmitted through her emergency radio. The airstrikes eliminated the remaining Taliban fighters and destroyed cached weapons that had been prepared for the ambush. Rodriguez's intervention had not only prevented American casualties, but had also resulted in the destruction of a significant enemy position. Colonel Mitchell received reports of the successful airstrike and the role played by unknown sniper support. The precision and range of the shots being reported by various sources were starting to create a legend within military intelligence circles. Someone was operating in the mountains with capabilities that bordered on the superhuman. The weather finally cleared enough for helicopter operations just as Rodriguez and Park reached their predetermined extraction point. The Marines had been moving through hostile territory for over 18 hours, constantly pursued by enemy forces while maintaining the kind of operational tempo that would have broken less disciplined soldiers. The extraction helicopter arrived under covering fire from attack aircraft that had been redirected to support the rescue operation. Rodriguez and Park reached the aircraft just as Taliban fighters appeared on surrounding ridges, firing automatic weapons at the departing helicopter. The rescue succeeded by a margin measured in seconds rather than minutes. During the flight back to base, Rodriguez learned that her actions had saved not just Chen's Ranger Patrol, but potentially dozens of other American soldiers who might have walked into the Taliban ambush she had disrupted. Intelligence analysts estimated that the enemy plans she had prevented could have resulted in the largest single-day American casualties in months. Colonel Mitchell debriefed Rodriguez personally, seeking to understand how one Marine sniper had achieved results that seemed to defy the normal limitations of human capability. The shots Rodriguez had made would be studied at sniper schools for years to come, representing a level of precision and tactical judgment that established new standards for the profession. Rodriguez remained modest about her achievements, insisting that she had simply done her job as a Marine and followed the basic principle of never leaving fellow Americans in danger. But military historians would later recognize her actions as representing one of the most significant individual contributions to combat operations in the entire Afghan conflict. The intelligence recovered from al-Masri's body revealed the full scope of the terrorist network's planned attacks on American and coalition forces. Rodriguez's decision to eliminate the terrorist leader rather than maintain her concealed position had disrupted coordination between multiple cell groups and prevented what could have been coordinated attacks across the region. Chen's Rangers made full recoveries from their wounds and returned to active duty within weeks of the ambush. Each member of the patrol credited their survival to the unknown sniper who had provided overwatch during their darkest moments. Chen himself requested a meeting with Rodriguez to personally thank the Marine who had saved his entire team. The meeting between Chen and Rodriguez took place at Forward Operating Base Chapman several weeks after the incidents in the mountains. The Army Ranger commander and the Marine sniper discovered a mutual respect based on their shared experiences in combat and their commitment to the welfare of American soldiers. Their conversation remained private, but observers noted the obvious bond between two warriors who had faced death together. Rodriguez returned to sniper operations with a reputation that preceded her throughout the military community. Her shots in the Kunar Province mountains had established benchmarks for precision and tactical effectiveness that would influence sniper training and doctrine for years to come. But Rodriguez herself remained focused on the mission rather than the recognition. The legend of the shot that saved Commander Chen became part of military folklore, told and retold in training schools and veteran gatherings around the world. The story represented everything that was best about American military personnel: the willingness to risk personal safety for fellow soldiers, the technical skill to succeed under impossible conditions, and the judgment to make critical decisions under extreme pressure. Park continued as Rodriguez's spotter for the remainder of their deployment, and the team compiled a record of successful operations that would make them one of the most effective sniper partnerships in military history. Their coordination and mutual trust had been forged during those desperate hours in the Afghan mountains when death seemed certain and survival required perfect teamwork. The Taliban never recovered from the loss of al-Masri and the disruption of their coordinated attack plans. The terrorist network fragmented into smaller, less effective groups that were systematically eliminated by coalition forces over the following months. Rodriguez's actions had strategic implications that extended far beyond the tactical success of individual operations. Years later, when military historians studied the Afghan conflict, Rodriguez's interventions in the Kunar province would be recognized as a turning point in the fight against terrorism in the region. One Marine's willingness to abandon her primary mission in order to save fellow Americans had prevented what could have been devastating losses and had eliminated a key terrorist leader whose death disrupted enemy operations for months. Rodriguez completed her deployment and returned to the United States with decorations that recognized her extraordinary service, but she remained reluctant to discuss the details of her most famous shots. For her, the most important outcome was not the recognition or the legend that grew around her actions, but the simple fact that good soldiers had survived to return home to their families. The story of how a legendary sniper saved Commander Chen and his Rangers became more than just another war story. It became a testament to the bonds between American military personnel and the lengths to which they will go to protect each other. In the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, Rodriguez had demonstrated that individual courage and skill could still make the difference between life and death, victory and defeat, hope and despair.